Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast-forward planet. This is Andy Revkin, 40 years of journalism focused on sustainability questions, and almost 4 years of doing Sustain What, which are conversations around issues where complexity and consequence collide. And fossil fuel funding in campuses is one of these. There's a lot of heat around this issue, a lot of yes, no kind of debate, get rid of it, or what are you talking about kind of debates. And that's what drew me to this group of Stanford students and researchers, young researchers, who have come together in a dialogue and come up with a proposal for Stanford in how to deal more effectively, more responsibly, both in vetting, soliciting, and accounting for money coming from the fossil fuel industry in a time of serious global warming with impacts that are unfolding all around us in ways that are profound, but also in a world with deep energy needs. We don't live all energized lives. I live in Maine in a house that's well insulated. We have heat pumps and, we're comfortable, but I also have a generator with propane in it if the power goes out. And most people in Maine can't afford to have that backup. And even if they got heat pumps, that means they'd be in the cold, relying on their wood stoves. And that's just Maine. You take this question to rural Africa or to India, where 100 million homes are still cooking on dung and biomass. Energy options have to expand. And that means fossil fuels aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So that's enough of a preamble. The question is, how do we move forward in a world that has both energy needs and climate concerns? And what do young researchers feel we should be doing about all this? I'm showing you kind of a galaxy of some of what you can see online in relation to this. But now let's meet the people who've come together here today. I heard about this first through Heated, my friends Emily Atkin and Ariel Samuelson over at Heated World did a quick interview with Rebecca Grekin, who when they saw this Stanford letter that I'll show folks in a minute. We have Daily Wettermark, and you're going to hear from each one in a second. Yanai Kashtan and Dr. Wenan Long. And so what I'd like to do is first ask you each just a thumbnail, like what drives you forward? What are you looking for in the world that relates to energy and climate? And how have you become who you are so far? And maybe we'll start with Rebecca, because it was your output that really got me focused on this. Rebecca, if you could unmute and
Sure.
kind of introduce yourself, that'd be great.
I think my internet is not as great as I would have liked it to be, so I apologize if I
Wait. So you're in Silicon Valley and there's bad internet?
apparently. But so I am currently a PhD student in the Energy Science Engineering program at Stanford. And I've been at Stanford now since 2019. I first did my master's and then continued on to my PhD. And sort of how I got and if I'm breaking up too much, I can try moving into the living room, but there might be more noise.
You broke
Um,
up a little bit there at a key moment, so just repeat that last.
sure. So I'm originally from Brazil. I was born in São Paulo. And I think a big part of Brazilian culture is sort of this idea of like, let's not waste, let's be sustainable, let's think about how we can give new life to things. And so ever since I was little, I've been like a huge recycling person. So I used to be the crazy person in middle school that would go like see an aluminum can in the trash can and be like, no, and like stick my hand in the trash can and put it in the recycling. Um, and I went to middle school in Texas, so it was a really big difference there in terms of culture and how much people were thinking about um, sustainability. So I have my passion has sort of always been sustainability, and sort of what my definition of sustainability has changed a lot over the years as I've learned more and seen like, oh, it's not just recycling, it's not just let's use less plastic. There's a lot more aspects to this whole issue. And so basically, how I've gotten here has been my curiosity to learn more about sustainability on all the different aspects of it. So that's a quick intro.
And we'll get to the funding questions in a second. One thing that's notable for sure is you're in a program there that's got Exxon funding, if I have that right.
Sorry, I broke up probably, but I didn't hear
Oh,
what you said at the end.
Is it correct that you're involved in a project or a program there that's funded in part by Exxon?
Yeah, so I'm currently on an external fellowship, which is fully funded by Exxon. And
Okay.
there's a long story about how that happened, which I won't get into right now.
Okay.
But it was not an easy decision for me to accept this fellowship. But part of the interesting bit is just my research is in commercial building air conditioning systems,
Mm-hmm.
and my master's was in food emissions. So it has nothing to do with anything that Exxon does at the moment.
Right. And again, we'll get to this, issue of how those realities can play out in a world that isn't yes, no, or banish. So maybe Yanai, I'm sorry, you already
Uh,
told me your name. Forgive me.
Yanai, no
Yanai.
problem. Uh,
So what gets you going in the morning when you think about energy and climate, and what are you doing at Stanford?
I think one of the things that really gets me going today is just thinking about solutions we have that not only work to fight against climate change, but also are just better, things that people can say yes to happily. So, and thinking about um, my PhD research is on indoor air pollution from fossil fuel appliances, and so I really like overlaps where doing something that's good from a climate point of view also helps people's health right away. Stepping back a little bit, I think growing up, my interest in climate change was frankly a little self-centered. I grew up in the East Bay and loved hiking and running in the redwoods, and learning that they were threatened by climate change made me sad because that was my backyard, and so I wanted to do something about that in a pretty small way. And then as I grew older and learned more about climate change and realized, wow, me losing my pretty redwoods is a relatively small price relative to what a lot of people are dealing with today, literally being forced out of their ancestral homes. So that sort of lit a fire under me even more so when I realized the scale of the issue. But it's certainly been something on my mind for a long time. I also was a huge chemistry science nerd and got my undergraduate doing a lot of chemistry, and so figured I would do something in the chemistry vein. Came here to do that. Came here to basically do catalysis for climate change. It's a longer story, but the connection to funding is that lab received a lot of fossil fuel funding, and we're doing projects that after about a year I came to view as pretty incrementalist and not anywhere near the sort of speed we need to actually do something meaningful about climate change. And so
Yeah.
that critique of the specific research then led me to sort of a bit of questioning about what is fossil fuel funding doing on campus.
Right.
And of course, we can talk more about that later.
So this is one of these issues that's a pretty hot one these days about gas stove emissions. I came at this indoor cooking issue in 2017. I did a lot of reporting on biomass burning, as I said, in India and other places, and the pollution levels are just insane that are routine. And unfortunately, and still over 1 billion households, and the number isn't getting better because of population growth in poor regions of Africa, which is that issue, whether it's here with natural gas
Yeah.
emissions or overseas, is really a critical one.
And of course, one of the nuances here is that, of course, from a health perspective, burning natural gas in a stove is certainly better than biomass. So if you're burning biomass, you prefer to go to natural gas or leapfrog it entirely if you can. But certainly there are places where people are trying to go to natural gas, and of course places where you're trying to move away from it.
Yeah. And Daly, you're whoops, sorry. I pushed the wrong button. There's no magic producer here. It's just me.
You're
Daly
doing
Wedemar.
the navigating and hosting at the same time. I have to say,
Oh,
I've been in that position before, and it's not easy.
No. So tell us a little bit about what drove you into this arena. I've seen you've done some speaking at regional, local areas about the climate crisis, and how does that intersect your your feelings about global warming and your academic work. Just
Yeah,
tell us a little
absolutely.
bit about you.
My path into this, I see myself as my career is in the water sector, working on wastewater treatment and recycling, but I also very much see myself as an activist, and more have believed that those two things don't have to be separate, but can actually be very complementary. And my journey into that space, well, started off, similar to and Rebecca, just ties to home. I remember my earliest instance of being upset by environmental problems was when I was pretty young. I used to go play with these tiny little tree frogs in our backyard that were very cute, small and green. And then year after year, I noticed that there were fewer of them, and eventually connected the dots that it was because of mosquito spraying and other types of pesticides in our neighborhood. So that was kind of a first entry point to caring about the environment. Learned about climate growing through high school, and then went to undergraduate with the intention of doing something related to climate and the environment. And I would say that was a very techno-focused perspective. I studied mechanical engineering in undergraduate and really had the perspective that, well, we just need better technology. We need cheaper alternatives to what we're doing now, and that's the market solution to the problem. And going into that, I found my way into the water sector, actually just because of corporate presence on campus to a certain degree. I got a job with a company that was recruiting at a career fair, ended up doing my undergraduate thesis with a project that company was sponsoring on campus, and then spent 4 years there working on water challenges. And so, I was very familiar with the fact that to a large degree, my current career is because of how these companies were present on a college campus. And then being in that corporate world, I think I became a little bit more disillusioned with the incentives of these large corporations, especially when it comes to climate challenges, and how people might say one thing publicly, but their private decision-making and funding and acquisition strategy, whatever it may be, doesn't necessarily reflect that. And then coming into Stanford, into the Doerr School, I applied and was admitted to Stanford before the Doerr School of Sustainability was actually announced. And then shortly after I got admitted was when the Doerr School of Sustainability was announced with a, over $1 billion endowment. And then that was when it became public that the school would continue to accept money from fossil fuel companies. And I was just thinking, shoot, I was wanting to come into academia to kind of get a break, get something, a refreshing change from this kind of corporate profit focus mentality. And then is it just going to be more of the same? So honestly kind of considered whether it was the right decision to come back and study at Stanford. And then instead of that, started organizing with Yanai and another focus group of people who formed the Coalition for a True School of Sustainability. And we had a lot of really early activism, vocal opposition to working with fossil fuel companies, which started to spur a lot of debate on campus, and then eventually led to a lot of the collaboration with the group here today, which we can talk more about. But that's my story.
Yeah. By the way, is this coalition, is this only at Stanford, or is this, oh, no, I see, about the door. Is it just a Stanford thing?
This particular coalition is Stanford specific, but we're part of a larger network called Campus Climate Network. And they're kind of a coalition of coalitions, groups at various campuses that are working on similar things.
Great. Well, let's hear from Winan, and then we can get into where this is going in terms of trying to influence some decision making at Stanford.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Winan Long, a recent graduate student, PhD student from Energy Science and Engineering Department at Stanford. So my research interest is mainly focused on estimating and simulating the greenhouse gases of the upstream of the entire oil and gas supply chain. So that's my major interest. My background was in the petroleum engineering. So as you may know, that's before Energy Science Engineering Department, it actually was the Energy Resource Engineering. So Stanford was pretty much, this department is renowned for its research institute in the area of the petroleum engineering domain. Like a lot of many professor in our department have research or collaboration with the oil and gas industry to do a lot of subsurface modeling, enhanced oil recovery. So it's a very famous research institute in this domain. But when I joined a group, Professor Adam Brandt's group, to do this type of study, like investigating or simulating the greenhouse gas emissions for the upstream of the oil and gas sectors. So it's kind of I was in a dilemma, because the oil and gas people are gonna say, okay, why you're doing this, right? So it's like we are focused on we talk about energy security things, right? We want to produce more crude from subsurface. So we wanted to investigate, put money, put time on the time to enhance your recovery, right? To produce more oil from subsurface. On the other hand, like the environmental scientists say, okay, so possibly in the next decades, we need to get rid of the oil. So why you studying its emissions? We need to gradually get rid. So it's something like a living into this. I would say this debates, and finally I find a way to resolve it. One thing I think about from my perspective, so does human need oil in the future? Let's say not say about the 20 decades or 20 years. Let's talk about 50 years. Yes, we need oil because we need plastic. That's pretty simple question, right? So I like this water, so I need this water bottle. It's made of plastic. So yes, so oil needs to be produced in the next, let's say, 50 years in the long time run. And second question is, okay, so how can we eliminate the bad actor, just like what Stanford and many other universities are doing here? How to identify those bad actors in this industry and divest from them. So yes, we what we can do is we label a score for them, right? Make a criteria and label the score for them. So that's basically my research.
That's right. And this I guess this gets at the core issue here that you've identified and you're all working on together, which is the world has more than one demand right now. One is to slow global warming. One is to reduce impacts from global warming. That's emissions reduction and risk reduction, vulnerability reduction. And one is energy access. And anyone, I've been writing about climate change since 1988, half of my life. And, I used to see it as sort of a unitary thing. There's a climate problem. Then it became more clear that there's this intersection of energy and climate is really tangled. And that's what divided me from my old friend, Bill McKibben, who's out there, saying no to a lot of things. And I'm more nuanced. I'm a reporter, And so you tell me a little bit about how you started to develop this cross-cutting dialogue. How did you find each other?
Yes. So I think the biggest question, I have, and actually is a group of scientists or researchers that doing the similar research have this similar issue, is that the data, like how you gonna, so this is like how we get the data, either from the oil and gas industry, direct from oil and gas industry, or from third-party data provider, or from the literature review. So the data is the key. And second thing is that how we publish them. So the good thing is that, we actually, this research, I think I put into my bio, this Archie initiative research, if you can post now, show it.
Oh, right.
So basically that's majorly funded by Aramco. The good thing for it is that actually it's a group of scientists from other university, like the University of Pittsburgh, University of Calgary. We work together. We build this platform. We kind of collecting all our research outcome into this one platform and generating these visualizations. Yeah, if you can click the Data Explorer, it's gonna be show you what it's gonna look like. Yeah, on the
right. I see. Yeah,
Data Explorer. And yeah, click OK. This is nonprofit. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So then you have a new window to show the oil and the power. So we couldn't see the new window pop up.
Well, we'll have to do a whole nother webcast on this one.
Oh, yeah.
Because this idea of imposing, sort of clarifying transparently,
right. So
the full effects of things is really important.
So this thing is everything like we put it here is on the published peer-reviewed paper. So this is for power supply, and also I would suggest click the oil because our major interest in the oil.
That's where we are. Right?
And you see those lines; they are pipelines. If you click United States,
hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure I've got this right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Canada, but that's fine.
Yeah,
so you see,
there we go. Look at that.
You see the shipment entering in the United States and moving out. So that's major the crude oil tank for the shipment, right? So on the left-hand panel, you see the carbon intensity. Basically, it's carbon footprint for the crude oil. So in the unit of kilogram CO2 equivalent per barrel. So you see the gasoline there. Basically, this is well to pump, which means it's measure everything that's oil and the gas company is doing, right? Except the combustion. So this is for the well to pump. You see the gasoline that is 107 is from the subsurface to all the way to the pump. So that's the emissions.
That's fantastic. I want to. I could spend an hour exploring that with you, but let's do that. I want to follow up and do another webcast on that because I have some other. There are people trying to do similar things with other kinds of resources. Doing that. So that's fantastic. Went on, and maybe Daly and Rebecca, you could say a little bit more about. So how you have engineering, you have your various approaches in the sciences, and you know what? I'll show the list of recommendations you've come up with is what I'll do. But tell me a little bit about how you found each other. Maybe Rebecca first, if your signal is okay.
Yeah, I think I switched and it should be better now, I hope.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
But yeah, so I mean, actually, another student I think is really the one that we should credit with bringing all of us together. And basically, he was put on the CFERE, which I'm very bad at names. If anyone could jump in and help me with what those letters stand for.
Committee.
The
Committee on Funding of Energy Research and Education.
Got it.
Yeah. And so Adam Nayak was the one who was appointed to that committee as the only student representative. And he was really instrumental in sort of convincing the committee that we needed student voices and that actually we believe sort of that that even though there are lots of different viewpoints throughout the different students on campus, that there is still some amount of overlap in what we believe. And so basically, I think we were all participating in events that were happening across campus, just trying to get input into what this committee was doing. And sort of Adam noticed that we were all sort of showing up a lot and maybe had something that we could contribute to this committee, hopefully. And so basically he recommended that the 6 of us get together and just start talking. And I didn't really know what I was signing up for when I agreed with Adam to show up to, a Zoom meeting one afternoon. But I think at this point we've probably spent, I don't even know how many hours on Zoom together, having really interesting discussions and doing some really exciting work, I think. That's my sort of perspective on how we've come together.
Great. So here's the, let's just scroll through this a little bit. I'll try to make it big enough so those who are watching can get the rough idea. You had written that you wrote this letter. It was published in the Stanford Daily in October, I think. And it's basically, my sense is it's designed to hopefully influence this fairly, I won't say opaque, obviously, because you have a student in the mix, a process that's happening to try to update Stanford's approach to energy research funding. and your letter, which is on, I reposted it on my newsletter. But here's your recommendations. We'll just kind of tick down this. And this, could you just explain what industry affiliate programs are specifically?
Sure. So industry affiliate programs are a type of research program which they're called that at Stanford. Some version of them might exist at other universities, but to break it down, there's two different types of money in general that come into universities. There's gifts, and then there's sponsored research, where a gift is money that's given to the university, and they say, here, do with this what you wish, or give it to a faculty and say, do with this what you wish. And sponsored research would be some sort of grant or some sort of donation where there's a deliverable associated with it. Now, these industry affiliate programs exist in a little bit of a gray area between the two, where officially the money coming into them is considered a gift, but then there's also a number of donor benefits which are involved. So these are programs where you might have 3 or 4 or more different companies or organizations putting money in. You might have a handful of faculty and their labs who are involved in the program, and then together they're outputting research. And then where the slight difference from just a pure gift comes in is that these donors are also getting benefits, which include attendance at annual meetings where research outcomes are discussed. They include access to recruiting students. They include the ability to send visiting scholars to campus. And the reason that we've really focused in on these industry affiliate programs in particular is that there's a lot of the what comes up when we have this discussion about potentially like restricting fossil fuel companies' presence on campus is the question of faculty autonomy and academic freedom. And these industry affiliate programs exist and are a Stanford program. They're not a faculty-specific program, which means that a lot of the academic freedom policies which apply to a faculty, they can take money from whoever they want, maybe don't apply to this program where Stanford is the owner of it. So that's an overview of what these are.
Yeah. And so the first point in your list that you came up with together is to take effect immediately, review, identify, and eliminate benefits to industry donors that present a direct conflict of interest, in particular by enforcing Stanford's existing policies for industrial affiliate programs. That kind of implies that these policies have not been enforced. Is that part of what you're saying there? Yes, you and I?
Well, I think I can speak for everybody on this call. Of course, language can be interpreted in multiple ways. But I think everybody on this call, despite our differences of opinion on some issues, would agree that at least in some cases, yes. And one glaring example that we've zeroed in on is this issue Daly mentioned about advisory boards. So we're still trying to figure out, really nail down on what it is, like the actual direct power that these advisory boards have. But for instance, the Natural Gas Initiative, like, effectively sells seats on its board for $250,000 a year, or phrased differently, that is one of the benefits one has if one donates $250,000 a year. And so that's a level of interference from the donor that we all think certainly is incompatible with kind of the goal of the university of having of truth finding, and also at odds with the policies.
Well, buying influence is always buying access, wherever you are is questionable. I was going to show earlier at the New York Times, Washington Post, a lot of newspapers that are doing good coverage of climate change are also taking money from fossil fuel companies. Not only that, the New York Times, I left there in 2016, but in recent years, they have this branded content business the New York Times owns that makes ads for Exxon. So and of course, I know the Times newsroom well enough to be able to say confidently that doesn't spill into newsroom decisions, but it does give the industry a greenwash, credit, because you'll see the New York Times logo and Shell logo together. So these issues are, I think you're onto something really important. Do you have a sense of, is that a movable knob? Do you think that's one that's potentially changeable? I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on that.
Yeah, it seems like, well, especially on this kind of enforcement of existing policies, it seems like that's really the low-hanging fruit. And from a lot of our conversations with other leaders at Stanford, it seems like that's something that we can certainly move on and at least try to understand better what are these benefits and are they in conflict with the existing policies. Another one of the low-hanging fruit pieces we've been pushing on is related to transparency, and that's something where we've actually made progress. So a year ago, there was really, other than a price tag listed about how much it costs to be part of these programs, there was no information about the total money going into these programs publicly. And that's starting to change. So now on the Stanford Door School website under industrial affiliate programs, they're listing total funding to these programs, and will be listing by the end of the year actual individual corporate donations, which is a big step forward.
Wow.
And also helps us understand where do we go from there? Who are the players, and which of these players are cause for concern, where we might get to the question of dissociation, which is step 2 on these recommendations.
Yeah. Right, here's dissociate, which is, I noticed Princeton has a dissociation program underway, and this feels like a challenging one because some of these things could be contested, whether a company is a bad actor or not. Who determines what's a credible transition plan? Who determines in this world of net zero talk, is there any company out there that is managing their operations in a manner that is consistent with Paris aligned transition pathway? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So so there we have some more details on that second point.
Yeah.
But we also have been working with the committee to actually turn this, which borrowing language from one of our members who is not here, is if this is maybe the UN resolution version, we're trying to turn it into law, right?
Yeah.
This is Cedric's framing. So one big question, right, is if you're a university administrator, what kind of framework makes your life not terribly difficult? And so one angle on that is this disinformation angle. One thing that we propose, and I think maybe more clear cut than some of these transition pathways, just involves court decisions, right? If you're a company and you've been found in a court of good standing, to have, for instance, to take one concrete example, misled the public through your advertising about your sustainability and may no longer advertise in that country, as in the case of both Total and Shell now, that could fall into the category, for instance. So that's sort of one more clear-cut metric.
You're reminding me of something. Maybe I'll bring it up in a minute. I'll circle back.
Really quickly add to what Daly said earlier.
Sure.
So Arun Majumdar, who's the dean of the school, the Door School of Sustainability, actually wrote a response to our letter, published, I think at this point, maybe 2 weeks ago. Time is a little blurry, but he basically said unequivocally that the school needs to follow any sort of existing policies and make sure that those are being enforced. So we do actually, I think you asked about if that needle was movable, at least on the existing policies and those being enforced. We definitely got the huge thumbs up that is something that needs to happen.
That's so interesting. Well, hold on, I want to show something here. Well, let's walk through this a little bit more to be sure I'm not forgetting any of the key elements here, and then I'm going to show you something and ask about what I'm thinking is there some way, especially because it's a new school, to shape the curriculum around the needs? In other words, if the needs are transparency, consistency with Paris, solid data, as went on was showing, how much of what can happen at Stanford can happen by having the power of students at various levels become the vetting process? Is that seen as part of the path forward? I can give you an example if that doesn't make sense. In other words, let me just tell you, there was a university, West Virginia University, around 2017. There was a tiny project at West Virginia University measuring emissions from cars for a particular purpose, with a small grant from the Clean Air Group. And it was that work that led to the unveiling of the Volkswagen, this giant fraud at Volkswagen, where the car's computers were saying one thing about emissions and the actual emissions were another. And ever since I've seen that, I think, well, wow, if $100,000 grant to West Virginia University engineering program could unveil this massive deceit that has led to $15 billion settlement and all kinds of things, what's the potential for, even undergraduate or graduate classes at schools like Columbia, Stanford, to actually be out there doing the ground, building the ground truthing into the learning? That's what I was thinking about. Does that resonate with anyone?
So with first of all, I totally agree, and I love stories like that when people are able to make a big difference through some simple project. I think, and maybe I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question correctly, but I think on this topic, what we're seeing is that a lot of this work has been done. There's been a ton of research into the disinformation history of the fossil fuel industry. There's been, congressional hearings. There's been independent reports. And then in terms of even transition pathways, you pick which one you choose, but there's Science-Based Targets Initiative. There's, Transition Pathways Institute. So a lot of this work exists to square up companies next to each other, and yes, among fossil fuel companies, some are much more egregious than others in what they're doing and their plans to continue extraction. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but I think yes, that's certainly part of it. I'm always a huge fan of students being able to do the work, but what we also see is that there's a need for this decision to happen now. Every year that we continue to further partnerships that are potentially harmful, or in my opinion are harmful, that's another year of delay. So what I would certainly prefer is if we can work with the resources that are out there to make these criteria, make these decisions, and start moving.
Totally. No, I understand completely. Now, is there anything else here you want to highlight in terms of these points? So we kind of touched on, the third-party enforcement board. Is that something that's also actively in the mix?
I mean, yeah, we in CFERE are trying to figure out what that would look like. But we definitely would like, right, on the one hand, right, you don't want it to be this whole huge labor intensive, expensive thing, but you do want some mechanism that is permanent in some way so that companies can come and go. Basically, because we also have a mechanism for reassociation, right? You don't want only a stick, you also want a carrot. And so if you just have this one and done committee, then it doesn't really serve that purpose.
Right. Yeah, and this whole arena, of course, is a move. Everything is moving in the climate space. So anything you would want to have as this list of codes or standards or procedures has to be have an iterative approach too, because there'll be new technologies coming along, and what do you define as a fossil fuel company, or which companies come into this sphere? Does it include the battery mining, other resource intensive aspects of the problem that maybe not even are fossil fuels? Is that part of what you see going forward? I don't know if Winan or any of the others want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, so this recommendation, I brought up this recommendation to the committee since I've been working on this domain for my entire PhD career. So understand like this is crucial for many things. One of the things is public awareness. Like you build these things. So first thing we want to answer is that not all oil and gas company are evil. So we want to rank them, right? So just imagine if you talk to the public and say all of them that they are evil, and those evil company, have a lot of money. So what they're gonna do, right? They're gonna desperate. So we don't want to make them panic, right? So the first thing we gave them a rank to say, okay, so who did good, who did bad, and then how you can become a bad actor to a good actor. So kind of a positive cycle to push forward, to make them to not do, I don't like the word, but you can call it greenwashing. They can put money on the real investment to say, okay, I can make my score better. So, but in that case, it's that score has a very, fruitful, deep research. So actually, it can make the society, the planet better. So that's the thing. What I propose, right? Not to, yeah.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. And that takes me back to the core point. Maybe Daly, we could talk about this a little bit. Most of the conversations, not just around campuses, but in the kind of climate campaigns these days, are really about ending fossil fuels. We just described some of the realities of the energy needs of the world going forward. And I was in Norway in 2016 and saw Elon Musk give a talk at a transportation futures conference. I could show you the video, but I don't want to waste time. Where he basically said, we're going to need oil for a long time to come, even while I'm becoming the richest man in the world, selling even better Teslas and batteries. Daly, when you self-describe as a climate activist, and Emily Atkin, who runs the Heated website that interviewed Rebecca, she's very much about ending fossil fuels. And as I said, my friend Bill McKibben is at the lead, leading the charge. And is there any possibility? How do you explain what you're doing here?
Saying that, of course, there's a transition. And what really frustrates me is when we let that excuse of, okay, we will need some amount of fossil fuels in the next few decades as we phase out during the transition, we let that be an excuse to continue new extraction, which we know that we don't need, which we know is completely incompatible with the Paris line pathway. We let it be an excuse for, just continuing, for not changing. So I think when people say end fossil fuels, and end is a protesty word that you put on a sign, like Wenan said, we're going to need, I think to these days, like something like 10% of global petroleum production is put towards plastic. Some amount of petroleum will be used. I don't know much about bioplastics, but basically some non-zero amount will be used, but there's no reason that we should be continuing to extract new oil and gas. And that's what a lot of current research at Stanford is on. It's on new reservoir exploration. It's on new extraction techniques. Even IPCC says that is completely incompatible with a 1.5 or even 2 degrees future. So I guess all that to say, I feel very, very strongly about this, that there's got to be like some common ground where we can say where we say that the need for fossil fuels in the next 10, 20 years is not an excuse to continue producing more, because we need to start scaling back.
Yeah, but getting back to the research too, maybe Rebecca, the research span includes not just carbon capture and the like, but also you getting more work from less oil and efficiency questions. That the research can be part of that transition. The funding that comes to campuses is not. I guess that's one of the questions. Is there a restriction on what kinds of work would be suitable? Was that in your list actually? I don't know.
No, we didn't touch on that. But so the way that I see this issue is basically like, I unequivocally believe that everyone that's on this committee and both CFERE and also this group of students that we are a part of, like, what we want to do is help mitigate climate change and reduce the impacts of, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I think that one of the fundamental differences in how we're approaching this is what we think is necessary to get there. And so I'm of the belief that we can work with oil companies and fossil fuel companies as long as they're sort of being honest, which is why I think that there's a stick, but there's also a carrot bit for me is really important in the work that we've done. Basically, because they have, and the fossil fuel executives will say this too, but they have the scale, right? Like they do things on a scale that's sort of really hard to comprehend. And if we can get them to do the right things at that scale, that would be amazing and incredible. And so I want them to, a lot of the oil companies are now saying that they're energy companies and they're participating in this transition. And I want to believe that. So one of the things is I want to see the transparency, right? I want them to prove it, right? If they're saying these things, let's show it, put your money where your mouth is. And the carrot bit is basically like, for me, sometimes they're more risk averse or whatever, and they're like trying to go slow because it's a new field and they don't know so much about it. And basically, like for me, like we need to push them to try and do these things at the scale that I think they need to be doing, because we're going to blow way, I personally think we're going to blow way past 1.5 and even 2 degrees before we get around to doing the things that need to be done. And so we need all the encouragement we can get. And the way that, so basically my research, again, my master's was in food emissions. So I was looking at the scope 3 purchased goods, did a case study on food purchasing. And then now my PhD is in commercial building air conditioning systems and how to operate them in different ways so that they consume less energy and less carbon intense energy when they are running. And so the way that I see it is basically like, I'd rather Exxon's money be going to me to do this research than be put into getting more oil out of the ground. I have drawn that line before. I was offered an internship at Exxon where they were like, hey, will you find more efficient ways to get oil out of the ground? And yes, that does decrease the total emissions. And I sort of said, no, that's not what I'm interested in doing. And then they offered me an internship to do a life cycle analysis of, okay, let's take, lubricating oils from a vehicle, like when you go to get your oil changed. And what happens if we refine that instead of, so basically take that used oil, put it back into a refinery. What are the emissions associated with that instead of taking more oil out of the ground to get lubricating oils? And I said, okay, I'm okay with doing that. So let me go learn about that. And that's how I've learned about life cycle analysis. And that's sort of also one of the things that led me to where I am now, where my master's was basically a deep dive into life cycle analysis with scope 3 and food. So there are lines that I have drawn. And I think it's a very individual thing. I think there's lots of people that would be very excited to work on getting oil out of the ground more efficient. And I mean, if we have if we've already built out all the infrastructure to get oil out of a source, maybe we need to get as much as we can out of there so that we don't open up a new one. That's definitely not my area of expertise. But I can see the arguments behind that kind of thinking. But that was like a personal line that I drew. I was like, okay, I don't want to do that.
Sure. This is where I want to bring up this paper I think I mentioned briefly. I can't remember if it was before we got on the air or not. I was around 2011. I was writing, like many, about the Keystone Pipeline. And that was when Obama was still in office and his re-election campaign. And many climate activists were, clamoring, no pipeline. They were down in DC getting arrested. And I was writing more nuanced pieces about the realities that oil tends to find its way to market. If it's not that pipeline, it'll go to the British Columbia, which actually has happened. And so I wasn't going to jump on the no pipeline fight. And David Roberts, a really popular guy, a Grist blogger at that time, now at Volts, and Bill McKibben. I actually let Bill McKibben write a piece on my blog at the Times, stating his issues, but they were really kind of attacking me, calling me a VSP, a very serious person, which is not you don't want to be called that. And I don't see myself as some kind of stuck in the mud person. Anyway, I started Googling for like words like diversity, response, environmental crisis, and there was this paper that had been written by ecologists, ecosystem scientists, that had all these words in it, but it wasn't about political debates. It was about ecosystems. Let me just show you this, and it relates to what you've been able to do so far, which excites me. Hold on. Yeah. So this is a 2003 paper in Frontiers in Ecology, Response, Diversity, Ecosystem Change, and Resilience. Now you might be wondering why I'm showing it, but you look at what they said. This is language that I changed from the original language. The original language said the diversity of responses to environmental change among ecosystems, species contributing to the same ecosystem function, is critical to resilience. The diversity of responses. Basically, the paper says that if there's an environmental stress, the resilience of the ecosystem is more a function of the diversity of responses to the stress than the number of species. And that was kind of interesting. I thought, wow. So I did this. I changed the words to people and social. And now, 20 years later, they've done a new paper, the same people. And let me just show you that, which basically they've now moved the bar, and a lot more authors here. And there is evidence now that for an issue like climate change, which has so many components and dimensions, which around the planet has so many different impacts, if you're rich or poor, or northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, which has these factional fights over nuclear power or carbon capture or all solar. This paper basically says response diversity is a sustainability strategy. So what you are doing with what you did with your letter and what you're doing with your work, to me, by bringing together an Exxon-funded scientists and people among you, those with more of a real zeal for the sort of social activism part of the climate solution, doing what you've done is kind of capturing this idea that complexity is actually good, that we're not all going to step into the same energy future, and that there's so many questions about each of the energy pathways. If as I think it was Daly, it was Rebecca who said we're not going to hit 2. I'm with you on this. We're as the human species is pretty good at showing some signs of waking up to the problem and the solutions. And if we focus more on vulnerability reduction, which is a big focus of mine, who's in harm's way, who's dying in heat waves, you can get a lot further, through this process and working out the energy problems. What you need is diversity, and what you need is conversation. You need crosstalk among disciplines, among people with different orientations. And I'm planning to have Elmqvist, who is the lead author on these papers, and some of these other authors on soon to talk about how you can we normalize this? One of the challenges I've found, and I don't know if with you all, is it's one thing to say response diversity is good, in terms of addressing a tough problem like this. It's another thing for everyone to agree, to say, yeah, I'm all for 100% wind and solar, but I know it's not the only solution. Mark Jacobson, right there on your campus, would never agree to that. I don't think. Maybe I can get on here to agree to that. We're all kind of invested in our tracks. We're all worried that others will get more attention or more funding, or that policies will end up in a different direction. Does this feel resonant to you? Maybe we'll go around the circle here just a little bit as we get toward the end here. Just reflect a little bit on what you've learned by trying to build the dialogue, and whether you feel you're on a good track. Maybe Yana, we'll just go literally around the circle here as we are.
Sure, happy to respond. I would say, certainly I'm, for instance, Rebecca and I certainly differ on like how fossil funding, like it's sort of net positive or negative. And I think, I don't think we've swayed each other's opinions too much, but I certainly think that, I mean, for me, this sort of started out as just all right, curiosity, like, why not? And I do think that, like, getting to a point of, I mean, I don't know exactly how it ties into the, response diversity paper directly, but it is some kind of compromise and some kind of, demonstration of common ground and coming together, which is very important, obviously. So I think it's been super fruitful. I've learned a lot from Rebecca and Wenan and Cedric. And yeah, I also think, changing, I mean, I guess to your point, right, the end goal here isn't changing each other's minds necessarily, but we might keep going in our own directions, but at least have more mutual, understanding. One thing I would say specifically about like pathways and response diversity, I mean, intuitively, it certainly makes sense in the context of like an ecosystem or a group of humans responding to some challenge. One concern I have, of course, here is, there's particularities to every situation. And here you have a situation where you do have this super huge vested interest of the oil industry pushing specific solutions and not pushing others. And so when there's that kind of thumb on the scale, then I get more concerned about rhetoric around all of the above, because it can be masquerading. You can be masquerading behind all of the above rhetoric when you're really pushing the needle towards sort of industry preferred solutions. But absent of that, I mean, I think I absolutely agree.
Rebecca, any last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, I really like that idea. And I've always been I've moved around a lot throughout my life. I actually just realized recently that at the end of this school year, I will have lived in the apartment I am sitting in right now longer than anywhere else I've ever lived. And that's been and that life experience has sort of showed me like a huge variety of backgrounds and ways of approaching problems. And I've always been a huge proponent of it's really important in order to get the best solutions, you have to get a very diverse set of people thinking about the problem. Otherwise, some group is going to get forgotten, not thought about, some outcome is going to be neglected. And so I think that's been really exciting about working with this group. And it's been hard. I mean, I think every single time we have said we're going to like jump on a Zoom call or meet up, we've said, okay, like we're going to do an hour this time. And we end up talking for like 3. And it's good conversation. And it's not always like, sometimes we butt heads and that's okay. And I have learned a ton. And I guess just my like final parting thoughts on just clarifying what my feelings are about this whole thing is basically like, I think there are wrong ways to do research that is funded from fossil fuels or from other companies or sources. But I think that there's a way to structure it such that it isn't. I don't want to say right, because I don't know what that means exactly, but that it limits the possibilities of these sort of bad outcomes. And so that's like when I have been working with this group, like that's what I am how I'm framing it is basically, okay, let's put these guardrails in place to try and limit the possibility of these bad outcomes from not just fossil fuel funding, but sort of any sort of funding, because I think it's possible with any background. But yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a really great conversation.
Well, hopefully we can expand on it. Maybe get into that national network and in the future. Wenan, one last thought.
Yeah, so I'm very thankful for this invite, and also all the collaborative work that I work with in this team. So I think I was lucky to put because I think Rebecca can be the witness. At the beginning, I don't really understand what is going on, right? I kind of dislike this idea, and then that's pushed me forward to figure out what's going on there. And then gradually I received the information from Yana, from Daly, from John, then I understand, okay, I understand what's the real issue here, because I was focused on the engineering research part of something that is just too much focus on that. I don't realize that things happen on the other sides. So I think the diversity here, what I understand is like, don't put all the eggs into one basket, right? It's too risky. Sometimes people, we are human. We easily neglect something we think it's not important, but actually it's not. So yeah, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to learn from smart people and learn from their opinion, and which in return really helps me to rethink about my research. So I'm now, I've become more confident in what I'm doing and what I'm going to do in my future career.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you again. And Daly, a last takeaway thought.
Sure thing. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. I've had to jump out of the room I was in it too.
Sounds good.
Awesome, thanks. So all agreed for sure. It reminds me of there's a deliberative democracy lab at Stanford, and a lot of discussions around just like deliberative democracy and how we can deliver better governance in this unprecedented time. We were talking a little bit about 1.5, 2, 3, 4 C, whatever our warming will be. I also agree it's probably going to be more than 2, and it sucks. We're in this situation together as humans, and the more that we can ground ourselves in the fact that so many of us in this space, whether we work with fossil fuel companies, for fossil fuel companies, for renewables, protesting them, a lot of us are grounded in that fear, that uncertainty, those questions just about what our lives, what our children's lives will look like. And I think if we can connect over those human feelings, it grounds us in a good space to have these conversations about what we need going forward. I also have to say that I'm grateful for Rebecca and Winnan and Cedric just also being willing and brave enough to talk about this. Rebecca talking about your funding openly and being critical of Exxon in certain ways is really brave, and that's something that I don't see happening enough. I was listening to a podcast about how Simon and Garfunkel have totally hated each other for most of their careers, so they would like go to the public and criticize each other and say you're an awful person, and then they would go and record an album together. So, if not to say that's like the perfect model, but if we had like universities and fossil fuel companies, right now it's kind of this, it feels like this sort of false sense of peace where we're saying, oh, this is a great partnership. We're totally building value. But we know that on both sides, there's like criticism. And the more that we can be open about those criticisms, about those different needs, and still come together and make good music, in whatever shape or form needs to be made. That's the best we can do in this real pickle of a situation we found ourselves in.
Well, I thank you all for being part of this discussion today. This is just chapter 1, I think, of what I could do a series on lots of different campus issues related to these kinds of transitions that we know are necessary, but that are very hard. And that are happening sort of in parallel, but related to each other. As you said, as someone said, the corporate, the insider power of big companies. And again, whether it's big pharma or whether it's Department of Defense, which are also on campuses and to the hundreds of millions of dollars, or energy companies, or information companies, AI, these issues are just going to get more magnified. And the more students at various levels are engaged in the decision-making process, or at least the decision-shaping process, the better. So it's great that you've all taken time. And you're doing this in the middle of trying to be good researchers and good students. And that's also hard to do as well. It's part of being the civic duty we all have, is to fit in some time to look at the systemic questions, even as we pursue our own obligations. So thank you all for being here today, and maybe we can revisit things in the coming months. This is Andy Revkin. This is the Sustain Wet webcast, which used to be run out of Columbia's climate school, but now I do it just because some trying to drive forward constructive conversations around issues from here in Wabanaki territory and the coast of Maine. Thank you all, and good afternoon to you, good evening, good morning to everyone else. And as soon as we're done, this gets archived on X/Twitter, on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Please share those links on those platforms in relevant groups and keep the conversation going forward. So take care again. Thank you.
Thank you.